On this episode of Charged and Disbarred.
The story just turned from happiness to sorrow extremely fast.
I never thought that I would experience what I went through.
Kidnapped that
David ran his law firm a little bit like an enterprise. Lied to all members.
Judges and attorneys are like kings and knights in their own realm. It is unthinkable that in a moment of madness they can all be thrown away. Charged and Disbarred explores the true life stories of attorneys who have fallen from grace. Hear firsthand accounts from the victims, detectives, and prosecutors who brought these disgraced attorneys to justice. This is Charged and Disbarred. The capital of New York State, Albany, a city rich with commerce and a proud past. A local historian once stated, Dutch and Yankee, German and Irish, Polish and Italian, Black and Chinese. Over the centuries, Albany's heritage has reflected a succession of immigrant nationalities. Its streets have echoed with a dozen languages, its neighborhoods adapting to the distinctive lifestyle and changing economic fortunes of each new group. Albany, therefore, should be the perfect place to start a life, begin a family, and grow with the ever-changing and diverse social climate. But things are not often what they seem. It is here in the prestigious neighborhood of Pine Hills that our story unfolds.
Albany in general is very diversified. We have a lot of colleges. We also have the hospitals. Albany Medical Center is one of the largest hospitals in the Northeast. Doctors, nurses that are living in the area. We have students. A lot of them stay here and get jobs after they graduate. You also have young families starting out. You're seeing more people relocate to Albany for the cost of living and the quality of life.
This is exactly the area that Sean Brown and his fiancée Dana were looking to buy their first home, start a new life together, and begin a family.
Sean and I met about 10 to 15 years ago. He was a personal referral. Found out that Sean was actually a very good friend of my younger brother. That's why they call it Smallbany in Albany.
Being a mentor for me, I think is part of my life calling. Growing up in the Bronx, people who invested their time and effort in me. Going through college and being in Albany, I figured that, hey, I want to be able to help you. I still want to be able to try to make things better for you. Always loved the sport of basketball. I played it, allowed me to go to college. So this is part of my way of giving back and paying it forward.
He's just a straight up guy and people, he's well known in the city of Albany too.
It's a considerably smaller city. It's not as metropolitan. The social life was a lot quieter, which actually I liked. And it seemed like a good place to raise a family.
Went out looking at houses. I met his wife, at the time his fiancée, Dana. We looked at houses for quite a while and we finally found the right house that they really wanted to start a family in.
We fell in love. Actually, my wife fell in love with the property that we currently reside in. I thought it had too much grass to cut.
Well, he thought it was too much grass to mow because he had never mowed a lawn before.
We ended up settling on it after, a couple of months of just looking at properties.
We felt that it worked for us. After looking at so many houses, you really understand what it is that you want. When we saw the house, we really loved it. We could really just move in and be comfortable.
But the Browns were about to find out that their presence in the neighborhood was not welcomed by everyone. And the series of events that would follow would make them reconsider their dreams entirely.
The story just turned from happiness to sorrow extremely fast.
I never thought that I would experience what I went through in our neighborhood. It was probably about a few weeks into our move, and we had, just kind of unpacked everything, and we were sitting on the couch and watching a TV show.
2 days after we get our cable turned on and phone turned on, the phone rings. We let it ring. On the caller ID on the TV screen, there was a bar on the corner that had that name. So I'm like, And then the next call was St. Peter's Hospital, which is down the block from us.
And I picked up the phone, and on the other end was somebody that was yelling into the phone. Violent yelling. And once I started to make out what the individual was saying, he was saying such, heinous things and yelling racial epithets and all sorts of things, and I hung up.
She was devastated by what she heard on the other end of the call. And I was like, hey, what's going on?
The phone rang again. And this time, when I realized that it was the same person, I handed the phone to Sean. It was continuous again, racial epithets.
This, that, why would you want to move into this neighborhood? In a real scary kind of voice. So we're like, holy crap. Call the police right afterwards. This is 2 days into getting our phone.
Police came, they pretty much told us there was nothing that they could do because it was a phone call. They said that they would make a few rounds and make sure that the neighborhood seemed okay and that there was nothing suspicious going on, but there was nothing that they could really do but make a report.
So all these thoughts, racing through my head. What if somebody comes in my home? What if somebody breaks the window? How am I going to protect my family? It was a hard night going to bed, but the next morning, I remember reflecting and saying to myself, well, if I wake up in the morning and my property is defaced, then I got a problem on my hands.
As the days went on, we continued to get these phone calls.
I'm worried. We ask the police to do extra patrols.
We rarely even get a police car down our street. We live on a very quiet, very small street with a lot of people that are retired.
Calls that are threatening and harassing, saying we're gonna come kill you, we're gonna come kidnap you. Didn't know any neighbors. All I knew that the majority of the neighbors were white, so I don't know who to trust.
Being a Black woman in the Northeast, it's relatively diverse, but it's often that I'm working in an environment that is majority, of white people, and going into that environment with what just happened, racial harassment and discrimination, it makes you feel violated and to question how people feel about you. I'm looking at people and I'm thinking, is this what you're thinking? Do you feel this way about me and you're not saying it? Every time we got home from work, we would be met with a phone call, sometimes 5 to 10 to 15 calls in a row, back to back.
Timely, harassing calls that was very matter of fact and very specific to give us the impression that someone is watching us 24 hours a day. She came home at 6 o'clock. I told you not to come back to the neighborhood. You stupid. I'll kidnap that. When she comes home, you need to move out of this neighborhood now or else.
It's mental warfare. I didn't want to be in the house alone. Nothing had happened in terms of physical harm, but it still has such a toll on your security.
It would come in on the caller ID as different establishments, from St. Peter's Hospital to bail bondsman to Pizza Hut to Time Warner. So you didn't know who was real and who was fake.
I started to, look up every number that the phone calls were coming from, because every time the call was made, the number would change. And every single time it would be from a different phone number, a different place in the neighborhood, as well as the Ku Klux Klan number from Arkansas. Because the numbers were changing, because some of the numbers that he was using were from out of state, the FBI got involved with the case.
Time Warner called me because they provided the phone service, and they say, listen, we were contacted by the FBI and the Sheriff's Department. We have to release these records.
The FBI began a manhunt utilizing all the evidence and documentation the Browns had accumulated through the months. Every racist, sexist, and despicable act left a trail that was leading prosecutors closer to the individuals responsible. But the Browns were not done with their own efforts. They had one last move that would eventually reveal even more victims.
He did a couple of interviews with local media. Then sure enough, after the news report, a Dominican woman who lived 3 houses down from us, who had a grandson, said that she's been getting harassing phone calls as well. Talking about, I'm gonna kidnap that little that plays in the yard.
The Browns didn't know it yet, but things had just taken a turn in their favor. The very tactics that were keeping the vicious attacker's identity secret would be the very thing that would bring him to justice.
detectives 3 weeks into it said, hey, we have a lead.
The FBI said that they think that they might have a lead on the case, but the individual that was doing these things had track phone. The person was discarding the track phone so it wouldn't be traced, and also using a service called Telespoof, which I had never heard of at the time. Telespoof is a service in which somebody can choose a number.
Using this spoofing program, you pay for the program, you type in your area code and it shows different numbers of legal establishments.
That will show up on somebody's caller ID, and they can distort their voice. Typically, this was used by like telemarketers, so either telemarketers or bill collectors, so that people, would answer the phone. But he was utilizing it for this.
So when that started occurring, Tommy, we would always record the number and the entity.
The authorities had uncovered the identity of the man responsible for the harassing and hateful phone assault. But when they did, the story only became more confusing. The man was James Hennessy, at one time a decorated New York City police officer. But what was more shocking was that Hennessy was practicing law as an affirmative action attorney.
When we found out all of the backdrop information, I was floored. I made sure that I called the New York State Bar Association. He worked for the New York State Office of Civil Service as an affirmative action attorney. And I'm a New York State employee myself, so I'm saying, well, how did he even get my information? At the time, we didn't know that he lived a few blocks away. He had a dog. He walked his dog all the time in the neighborhood. We had a meeting with the DA's office. The first thing was an order of protection. Law enforcement did a fabulous job at the end of the day. They were able to, get information from the spoofing company.
James J. Hennessy Jr. was arrested and charged with 11 counts of second-degree aggravated harassment, charges that were later changed to hate crime felonies because of their racist nature. Judge Stephen Harris said Hennessy told the probation officer, "It was almost like a teenage prank thing. I saw how to do it on TV, I made a quick prank call, then a couple of weeks later I did it again. Shortly thereafter, I got carted off. I hate no one." Highlighting his work for an affirmative action program, Hennessy stated, "I've always considered people of any race my friend, and I generally have a very open personality toward anyone. I have a lot of remorse for what was done."
As the case unfolded, we found out that we were one of 41 people that were harassed in the neighborhood.
I just wanted to be as truthful and succinct as possible so that James Hennessy, the people in the courtroom and the judge, the prosecutor, and his defense attorney really understood the magnitude of what he did to my wife and I.
I've definitely experienced direct racism before, but I've never experienced racism that was so targeted.
In 2012, James Hennessy pled guilty to 2 felony counts of aggravated harassment in the second degree as a hate crime and was sentenced to a maximum of 1 to 3 years in prison. He was also subsequently disbarred.
He actually ended up serving a sentence of 3 years for an E felony, which is a hate crime or discrimination felony. I'm actually pretty grateful that he served 3 years because he had no record. It's not a guarantee that he would get jail time, but the judge was very upset about what he did. He thought it was more egregious because he was an officer of the court, because he held the job that he had being an affirmative action lawyer. The judge felt that there was no excusing any of his behavior.
Nobody was killed, but it's psychological damage to us and our family. It just has an effect on you. Do you feel the same way of even want to continue to live in a home? And we didn't.
I hope that he learned from it, but one would never know. And I feel like I don't believe that he did, honestly.
The lawyer was still trying to, make a case for him, and there was still no ownership or humility.
In December 2014, Hennessy's criminal convictions were vacated by Albany County Court on the sole basis that the underlying crimes were held to be unconstitutional by the New York Court of Appeals in an unrelated case. Hennessy subsequently moved for reinstatement to the practice of law, although he had previously resigned in May of 2012. However, the New York State Committee on Professional Standards opposed his petition as he had not been acquitted of the factual allegations underlying the criminal proceedings, so Hennessy remains disbarred.
We did everything within our power to make sure that justice was served.
It was shocking to hear that somebody could be so ruthless. He didn't destroy Sean's life, but a young guy, young couple just starting out. You know, some people would just get out of here and sell the house and move away. Sean's a tough guy. He stood up to him, went through the court system, and Hennessy got what was coming to him. He got disbarred.
Coming up next on Charged and Disbarred.
This wasn't just one-off behavior. The practice of the law firm was to keep the client's money, regardless of whether it was earned at all. David did whatever David needed to do.
This is Charged and Disbarred. For the most part, people choose a profession based on passion. Someone who enjoys teaching children will become an educator. A natural caregiver will pursue medicine. A person good with numbers may pursue the stock market. But occasionally, a person pursues their passion in a way most would not. Consider the curious case of David Steele. While David Steele has been accused of many things throughout his life, possessing a lack of drive and determination was never one of them.
So David Steele was a lawyer. He was admitted to the bar in Indiana in 2003. He started his legal career, interestingly enough, as an assistant prosecutor in Indiana state courts.
Equipped with cutting charm and an influential personality, Steele quickly climbed the political ladder. Armed with a good reputation and several high connections, he began to plan his next career step. But David Steele was forced to put his plans into action, perhaps sooner than expected.
Some have said that the reason why he left was because a judge criticized him because he was alleged to have been on drugs in courtroom. But he denied that, and the judge was later reprimanded for making those assertions.
It remains unclear what behavior was exhibited that would make the judge suspect drug use on the part of Mr. Steele. But one thing was certain. Mr. Steele made his voice known to the powers that be, and the judge paid the price for crossing Steele. Just over a year later, David Steele was arrested on suspicion of driving while intoxicated, but the police didn't believe alcohol was a factor. The arresting officers said Steele tested positive for drugs. Charges were filed on September 9, 2010, alleging Steele operated the motor vehicle while intoxicated and also committed reckless driving. As part of a plea agreement, the operating a motor vehicle while intoxicated charge was dropped, and Steele pled guilty to reckless driving. He was sentenced to 180 days in jail, which the judge suspended. In 2011, Steele successfully had the conviction expunged from his record. Steele was almost untouchable.
David started his own law firm, and he was a fairly successful law practice that was going on in Indiana, where personal injury cases, divorce cases, a general practice firm.
Now on his own, without anyone to pull in the reins, David Steele was free to practice law and run his own law firm the way he wanted. It took no time for his firm to grow in size. His track record and confident personality made clients trust him easily with their cases. He had a way of making people feel at ease, knowing their legal matters were in good hands. No one had any reason to doubt the practice of David Steele. This apparent loyalty and competence led clients to freely hand over their trust and money and made his secret agenda so easy to obtain.
So David ran his law firm a little bit like a criminal enterprise. He would get money in from clients. He would either not perform any of the work, or he would do some of the work and would owe money back to the clients, but wouldn't want to pay that money back. David did whatever David needed to do to prevent having to give the clients any of their money back. Ignored the clients, refused to return their phone calls, and just gave them the runaround. He also instructed his staff to assist him in delaying payment or refunding money to any clients.
It truly was a criminal enterprise, complete with a boss and an office staff willing to do whatever Mr. Steele instructed. There seemed to be no end in sight for the betrayed clients who Steele had vowed to help.
David's conduct in failing to communicate with clients and failing to report to them about their money is grounds alone for discipline. But what David did was a lot worse than that. He wanted to keep their money, whether he earned the money or he didn't earn it. David would cause his staff to inflate the bills, to increase the amount of the work that he actually did do, to show that, in fact, the clients were not owed any money back.
One must pause and offer a possibility. While someone's actions may seem brash, even cruel, are they within their legal rights to do so? Is David Steele the bully his former clients claim him to be? Or is he simply exercising his right to charge a premium as a lawyer in his position?
It's not inherently unethical for an attorney in certain situations to have a no refunded retainer policy, but those are in very specialized situations, which are all spelled out in advance. In David's situation, there wasn't any sort of language in any retainer agreements. His was a general practice. He didn't do anything special. He had no legitimate legal business reason to have a non-refundable retainer. He just fundamentally wanted to keep the money. Mr. Steele's policy was lie to all comers.
David Steele's actions were outside of the Indiana State Code of Ethics as well as the law. But monetary compensation wasn't his only reward. Steele seemed to take pleasure in the torment and pain of his clients.
He also would record client phone calls, which he would then play back for himself and for the people in his office, simply for their own amusement, which is not only a bizarre type of behavior, but it's also a violation of the client's privacy and confidentiality rights, and would be in and of itself grounds for serious discipline from any bar. Many clients come to lawyers because they have significant problems. Lawyers have to treat their clients with respect and dignity, and to record a client's conversation and play it back to members of the firm strictly because it's like a party favor, it's for your amusement only, is highly unethical.
The only people who knew the whole truth about the Steele firm, outside of Mr. Steele himself, was his staff. But why would any one of them stand up? After all, Mr. Steele has brought each and every one of them in on his schemes. They all participated in criminal activity themselves. To tell on Mr. Steele was to tell on themselves.
He had an office manager who would happen to be the paralegal who ran the office and was very concerned about David's ethics. And he brought David's ethics to David's attention. Mr. Steele took it upon himself to blast the individual by, number one, firing the person for questioning his ethics. He also brandished a weapon at the time of firing this office manager as an implied threat as to what would happen to them if they went to report his conduct to others.
It was some pretty aggressive tactics in an attempt to keep the office manager from talking to authorities. Tactics that had worked on past employees had also threatened to blow the whistle on Mr. Steele. The office manager, only being identified as JB, stated, "He told me I was gone and never to speak of him again. He said if I did, he would make sure I never make it into law school and that I would never work in this town again."
The office manager is actually the hero in this story. The office manager, despite the threats implied and expressed, went to the bar and told all about how David Steele's operation was being run. Once the office manager explained to the bar how Mr. Steele was operating his law firm and what his business practices were, it didn't take long for the bar to start digging around and corroborating this information with documentary evidence and other forms of evidence from clients and so forth.
The whistleblower, JB, said he had paid a personal and professional price and endured threats from his ex-boss after reporting his egregious unethical conduct. After contacted by the commission, Steele asked JB what would happen if he was disbarred. "Does that help you?" Steele asked. "All will ensure is that I have nothing but spare time to seek vengeance," he wrote, according to the record.
Once the documents lined up, It was all fairly clear that he did exactly what he was accused of doing. He left a lot of instructions in email. So he would actually put instructions in writing and send in emails to his office staff and employees. Do not return this money to the client, or increase this client's bill by X amount of dollars. So the bar charged Mr. Steele with 16 different counts of unethical conduct.
That 7-page unanimous opinion handed down this morning, the state's highest court spelling out in very clear terms how David Steele stole from his clients, the court calling his actions a pattern of systemic and wide-ranging misconduct.
All in all, Mr. Steele stole $150,000 from his clients over a period of time. This was a significant sum of money, and the Indiana bar took it very seriously. The outcome of the bar investigation was that Mr. Steele was permanently disbarred from the State Bar of Indiana. In some jurisdictions, you can apply for reinstatement after a period of time. Typically, it's at least 5 years. It's extremely unlikely that Mr. Steele would ever get reinstated by Indiana or would be admitted to any other bar, given the number of claims that were proven against him. My impression of Mr. Steele's conduct was that it was quite bizarre, to say the least. This wasn't just one-off behavior, but the practice of the law firm was to keep the client's money, regardless of whether it was earned at all. In addition, the personal behavior, the listening to recorded phone conversations for personal amusement, the threats to the staff who threatened to report him to the bar, his activity in trying to discourage people from ever reporting him to the bar, all points in the direction of a very bad person who has no business practicing law.
JB said he feels for law office staff and young associates who find themselves in similar dilemmas, torn between professional responsibility and the need to earn a living. I think it happens a lot more than people think, JB said. The court's explanation for the disbarment stated Steele knowingly made false statements during the Indiana Supreme Court Disciplinary Commission's investigation. Several of Steele's clients requested refunds for unearned fees, but Steele stated that he was unable to return anything because he had stolen nearly all the funds in the practice's trust account. In other cases, Steele refunded portions of client fees with advance payments collected from other clients.
Mr. Steele had this very strange view of his own clients, and he seemed to treat everybody with the same level of disrespect. In fact, in the court's opinion, it found that Mr. Steele's own MO was to treat all comers the same, whether they were clients, whether they were third parties, whether they were staff. It was treat them all with the same level of contempt, the same level of disrespect.
In ordering Steele disbarred and prohibited from the practice of law, the State Disciplinary Commission stated, Steele's actions amount to a pattern of systemic and wide-ranging misconduct, and rather than express any regret or remorse for his actions or the harm they have caused, Steele has proudly trumpeted his repugnant behavior as a raison d'etre of his practice. There can be no doubt in these circumstances that disbarment is warranted and that Steele's privilege to practice law should be permanently revoked.